Hello, I'm Andy. Welcome to my very first video that I've decided to publish. I say this is my first, well actually this is probably the 9th, 10th, maybe the 11th attempt of doing this video. So I ask you to please bear with me, this is all new and I've not done anything like this before. So I thought I'd put together this video based on my series of blog posts I've been doing on using Azure Virtual Desktop as a cloud privileged access workstation. Somebody asked me the question, am I going to do a video on this or have I done a video? And I hadn't, so I thought, hey, what the heck, let's give it a try. What can happen? Maybe I shouldn't have asked that. But yeah, it's an interesting topic, this one. There's a lot of debate around using a virtual PAW. Ideally, in any scenario, you want to use a physical privileged access workstation. I think maybe let's jump back a bit and discuss what is a privileged access workstation. In short, it's a secured, lockdown, hardened device that allows you access to your privileged access resources. So if you're using Office 365, Microsoft 365, Azure, any of the Microsoft Cloud services, ideally you want to have a separate dedicated device that your privileged users can log on to and perform tasks from. You don't want to be using your everyday device. One of the questions I had was, can I use a compliant device as my access as a privileged user? Sure, no, you don't want to, because that device is being used every day for daily tasks, accessing daily websites. You're probably looking at Facebook on it, what used to be Twitter. I still call it Twitter. I don't know about you. I've not got used to calling it X. But you're using it for daily stuff. And that is where you're going to potentially get access to malware or any potential vulnerabilities. So really, you don't want to be using a compliant device. The idea of the PAW is you have a second device that you then log on to with your privileged credentials and then perform those tasks. But a second device isn't always convenient and practical. I mean, there are areas where you cannot get away from a physical second device, government institutions or finance or possibly even healthcare. Anything like that, you're probably going to have a second dedicated device. But for small and medium size enterprises, it's a bit overkill. So this is where I thought perhaps using a virtual PAW would be sufficient. AVD was my choice. You can certainly look at Windows 365, but also you could look at using a virtual machine on your everyday device potentially. But I'd steer against that personally. I use a Mac pretty much day in, day out, and I have Parallels on there and VMs work on there pretty flawlessly. But on the Windows side, having Hyper-V or VirtualBox or VMware Workstation on there, would that work as well? Personally, I don't think so. You've then got the question of managing it. How do you go about deploying that virtual PAW? How do you maintain it? Yes, you'll register it in Intune potentially, but the initial configuration, it's a bit of a pain. So this is why I thought, well, let's have a look at a cloud PAW. Yes, you could look at it and call it a virtual PAW. I just called it a cloud PAW because it's in the cloud. And out with the deploying of AVD, if you're going to use Windows 365, it's a similar process later on in the steps. I think that'll be another video. But the overall reason is I just wanted to keep costs down to a minimum, and that's why I thought AVD over Windows 365, because AVD has the advantage of shutting it down at 7 o'clock, say, every evening, and using the start VM on Connect. So that will then start the VM as soon as you try and connect to it. So it means you're only paying as minimum amount as possible for the use of this. So I've deployed AVD several times through the GUI. I say several, quite a few times through the GUI, and it's relatively straightforward. But the idea here is I wanted to create a light touch deployment. So this is where I'm starting to delve into the world of Bicep and ARM templates. This is all new to me again, so I've only been playing around with Bicep and ARM templates for about 4 weeks. But I have to say it's pretty cool. I really like what you can do with it. And it's an ever-growing process. I think what I've done here for me meets my needs, but there may be something that you see different. So please call that out. If you see something that I may have done that you would do differently, please let me know, because I'm all ears and I love constructive criticism. And I think that's where community is great. Cloud is great because people just share their knowledge and they like to help people go along in their journey. So please, by all means, if you think there's something here that I could do differently, I'm all ears. But this, I started with one Bicep file thinking, hey, let's try and deploy the whole thing through one file. But it didn't quite work out like that. With the way AVD is set up, I had to do 2 Bicep files. So this will cover off my 2 Bicep files and my 2 PowerShell scripts that I've got just now. This will get us to a point where we have a full AVD environment running that you can then log on to. I've not done any of the locking down or any of the hardening yet. I'll do that as a separate video because otherwise it's just going to be too long. But hopefully this gives you the gist of it and an idea of where we're going. So let's wrap up this intro and we'll move on to the next bit where I will share my scripts with you and we're going to the portal. My scripts are linked in the description of this video, so please have a look there. They're on my GitHub. And again, if you see anything that may look different, by all means, please call that out. And I'm more than happy for you to make any recommendations on how I can improve it. Okay, let's head over to Visual Studio Code. So here we are in VS Code. As I mentioned earlier, I deployed this via 2 Bicep files and 2 PowerShell scripts. Ideally, I wanted to do it in 1 Bicep file, 1 ARM template, but I just didn't know enough about it. I used Azure Academy on YouTube just to get the basics and start learning about Bicep and how to deploy AVD specifically via Bicep. And that was a really good tutorial. I strongly recommend looking at that. I'll put the link in the description. But the thing I really struggled with was getting the registration key for the session hosts and then using that registration key to register the session hosts in the host pool. So I just went down the 2 Bicep file route. If there is a way to do it in 1, please let me know. I'd love to know how. And that way I can then incorporate that into just 1 Bicep file. So the first Bicep file will create the host pool, the app group, and the workspace. I've got some parameters set here, so location and a prefix. You'll see this prefix throughout this video. I've just decided to keep everything with CPAW in front of it for simplicity, but also it just makes it easier. I may look at seeing if there's a way to have different prefixes for the resource group, for the session hosts, for the host pool, etc., etc. But really, I think for tidiness and everything, it just works. You can call it VPAW, CPAW, or even CSAW, Cloud Secure Access Workstation, just for giggles. But yeah, it's entirely up to you. But I've just called everything CPAW for simplicity, and that's the trend throughout this tutorial. So let's get cracking on with deploying the host pool, the app group, and the workspace. So as I mentioned, this is all in Bicep. It's all really good. I mean, it specifies the settings. I want it to be a pooled host pool type. I want it to be desktop, not remote app. And then I've set some custom properties here. So this will allow me to log on with my Entra credentials, etc., etc. And then I've also put start VM on connect as true. So this is key for that cost saving part of AVD. So shut the machines down and then have them start up as soon as the user tries to connect to them. The app group, there's nothing special in here, and the same for the workspace. This is all pretty standard. So we want to deploy this in Azure using the custom deployment template. But this is in Bicep, and Azure needs it in an ARM template. Bicep is just purely to make it easier for you and I to read and write. To create this as an ARM template is really simple. Just right click on the file and go to build ARM template. And that in turn will create a JSON file. So let's open that up. As you can see, there's a lot more in here now. And it's just easier to write it in this and then convert it to that. So if I copy it all, and then I go across to my Azure portal. In your recent services, you'll have deploy a custom template. But if not, you can just type it in here and you'll see it listed there. So you'll see here I've got a resource group CPAW and a couple of VMs and that, but I've just deleted those. So if I hit refresh now, that should hopefully have disappeared. You know how it goes when you do a demo. It doesn't work properly. Yeah, there you go. They disappeared. And so if I look in my Entra, in my devices, nothing listed there. The same for Intune. And also there are a couple of groups that will be created later. So there's nothing there with CPAW in there. So we'll leave that where it is, but I just wanted to show you. So as I was saying, go to deploy a custom template. That loads up, and then you just want to build your own template in the editor. We don't need this in there. That's just put in by default. And then we just want to paste in what we've just copied from VS Code. That will say we've got two parameters set. So the location and the default prefix, and then the three resources, host pool, the app group, and the workspace. Let's hit save. And then we get to a point where we can select the subscription we want to deploy it to and the resource group. So as I said, I deleted all my CPAW stuff that I did previously. So let's just create new, call it CPAW. Okay, that's fine. Region, it's picked it up from the Bicep as well, and default prefix. You can change this if you want to, but I'm just going to, again, leave it as CPAW. So if I hit, well, I could hit next, but that takes me to review and create. So let's hit one or the other. And then create. Basically, when you click create, you're agreeing to the terms, which basically say you're now creating a resource that's going to cost you. Do you want to go ahead? Yes. This takes moments to deploy. There you go. You can see it's done. So if I now go to the resource group, no resources, that's fine. It was too quick. Hit refresh. Still no resources. Let's wait a moment or two. There you go. They're there. So we've now got our host pool, app group, and workspace. If we go into host pool, you see we've got no machines available in there. We've got our app groups. The workspace is just what's used in the Windows app, so we don't need to worry about that. But the main thing here is the registration key, because this is what we need for the session hosts. You can see I don't have one just now. So if we go and generate a new key, and I don't need it for that long, so let's just set it to midnight tonight. So that's not even 24 hours. Click OK, and that gives you the registration key. Let's leave that up where it is because we need that in the next step. So if I go back to another tab in the portal and let's deploy a custom script again, get this ready. So we'll leave that as it is. We'll head back to VS Code, and now let's look at the session host Bicep. So here you can see I've got a few more parameters. So again, the prefix of CPAW, Number of hosts, I've set it to 2. You can change this in here, or we can change it when it comes to deploying via the template. And then we've got the admin password. Now that's set as a secure parameter and it's a string. That means it needs to be hidden by the asterisks and whatnot. So that we've not set. Again, we set in the template when it comes to deploying, and then the admin username. I've just called that CPAW. This doesn't relate to anything else within the script or the resource group, so you can change that if you want to. Hostable registration key, well, we could paste that key that we got in the previous step here if we wanted to, but I'm going to leave that and paste it into the Azure portal when it comes to deploying. Set one variable, and that's the module's URL. This is used for the deployment or the joining of the session hosts to the host pool. So we need this later on in the script. So what this part of the script does is this references the host pool. It says there's an existing resource and it's a host. I've labeled it host pool, and the existing resource is what this is. So again, it's taken that from the session host prefix and host pool, so it knows it's the cpool-host pool resource. So that's the base of that bicep file sorted. To deploy a session host, you need 2 things prior to that. One is the virtual network, the VNet, and the next is the virtual NIC. So what the VNet does is that creates your network for the session host to connect to. I would strongly recommend using its own network, not an existing network on your existing Azure infrastructure. Have it completely isolated, because these are privileged access workstations, so they don't need any connectivity to anything else other than just the internet to connect to Microsoft 365 and Azure. Again, that CPAW theme, I've got that as the VNet name, CPAW-VNet, and I've just given it a 192.168.250.0/24 address space, and the same for the subnet. The subnet uses all the addresses in that address space, and it's called CPAW-subnet. So once it creates the VNet, it then creates the VNICs, and it'll create however many NICs you specify for the session host. So if you say you want 3 session hosts, it'll create 3 VNICs, and each one will be CPAW-0-NIC for the first one, CPAW-1-NIC for the second one, and so on. IP addressing is just dynamic. I don't need it to be static. And then I've got the subnet connection here. So this is telling it what subnet to go to. So now that's done, we can then create the VM. So the session hosts are purely just regular Azure virtual machines. They just have an extension installed on that joins it to the session host. So if you look at this VM, again, it's saying the job name of this deployment will be CPAW-0 or CPAW-1, etc., etc. And then I've set the size. Standard D2ASV5 is a standard AVD size initially when you go to deploy it. But if you look here, you've got all the sizes you can list. And then we set the computer name. So again, CPAW- whatever number it is. And then we set the credentials. So these are stored from those parameters above. The image, we're doing the SKU of Win1124H2 AVD. So that is the multi-session host. We're saying it's a Windows desktop, not server. We just want to use the latest. And then we connect it to the NIC. So that's the VM done. And that will deploy a VM in Azure, or deploy 2 in this case. And they're just regular VMs at that point. They don't have a public IP. They don't need a public IP. And they're just there. You can't do anything with them because you can't log on to them because you've got no connectivity to them at this point. I then deploy 4 extensions to them. So the first is the Entra, Join, and Enroll in Intune, because I want these to be Entra joined only and managed by Intune. So again, this will give the job a name, CPAW- whatever number it is, Entra, Join, and Enroll in Intune. And then it will join it to Azure Active Directory here. Microsoft Entra. I'm still getting thrown every time I see Azure AD listed in places, because it took me quite a long time to get used to calling it Entra, and then in the back end you still see references to Azure Active Directory. We're not going to get away from that anytime soon. I think it's going to be there for a long time. And then here we want to register it in Intune. So the MDM ID is the Intune app ID, and that is standard across every tenant. I don't think it changes for anything. So that will then join the VM to Entra, enroll it in Intune. Great, we've got that point done. Next, I want to install the guest attestation extension. So these are VM extensions that get deployed typically on most VMs when you deploy them, and it just bundles some security features in there. So I've deployed that, but I said it depends on the previous step completing successfully, because I don't want a half-baked deployment. If that fails, I want the deployment to fail. Once it's done the guest attestation, I can't say that, can I? We then want to do a bit of session prep. So this is a custom PowerShell script that it runs. I set this up purely because I wanted it to do a bit of cleanup on the VMs. So I've got it linked to this script here in my raw GitHub URL, so you can run it directly from GitHub. But this script will just do a couple of things. So if you have a look at that session prep script now, it does, one is Cloud Kerberos. So if you do want to then use things like FS logics for your session hosts, I'm still debating about this. Do I want profile management or not? I think you need it, but again, it comes down to security. But if I do go down that route, I want to have Cloud Kerberos enabled. So I've set that registry setting to be 1, and it will set that on the host. The next is I don't want any of these applications. I don't think anybody really uses these applications on the Windows desktop anyway, but especially on a PAW. So I've set a script here to remove all those kind of bog standard apps that get bundled with Windows when you install it for the first time. So I don't want that when I log on. So I just want that to clean it up at deployment. So that again is dependent on the previous step running. And then finally is the fun part where it joins it to the session host. So this will go through and join it based on the registration key. So this is deployed much in the same way as the previous one. We want a ARM template, so let's right click, build ARM template, and let's open the JSON file. You can see there it's quite long. So writing something like that won't be easy, whereas writing this is relatively easy. So if we look at this, copy it, and let's paste it in here, you'll see we've got 6 parameters. So the location, session host prefix, number of hosts, admin password, secure string, and then admin password is just a string, and host pool registration token info is a string. We've got that one variable that's referenced in the Bicep. So if we go back down here, we can see it, the module's URL. So we've got that referenced. And then the 7 resources, so the VNet, the virtual NIC, the session host, and then the 4 extensions. So if I hit save, you come to this screen again where we pick the subscription, and we then select the resource group. And then we've got a few more options here. So again, number of hosts, if we want to change that, let's put 5 in for argument's sake, it will deploy 5. I just want to keep it as 2. The admin password. So this is the local admin password for the session hosts. So that'll be the local admin. So if you need to log on as a local account, you've got that there. So set that username to what you deem acceptable, doesn't impact this deployment in any way. Set the password to what your standards are. And then we want to enter the registration key. So if we go back to the registration key, copy it, and then paste it in here, we're ready to go. So now we've got that key. If we close this and then go to the resource group, you can see I've only got 3 resources. If we go back to custom deployment and do review and create, we'll have here you're about to create 7 resources. Create. So this will go away and run it. So it's starting to create the VNets. And then it should start to then do the NICs, and then you'll see it starting on the session hosts. If we go back to there you go. If we go back to the resource group and hit refresh, you'll see a few more resources. You see a few more of these resources in there now. So refresh again. So you've got the disks, etc., etc. This takes about 25 minutes. So I'd say I'll pause this here, and I'm going to go and grab a cup of tea. So if you want to go and do the same, and I've got a nice rich tea biscuit here, which is a very underrated biscuit, I think. So it's really, really good biscuits, rich teas. Yeah, go and grab yourself a cuppa, and I'll see you back here in 25 minutes or so, and we'll continue where we left off. Hello, welcome back. I hope you had a good cup of tea. So this is almost completed. It's still running through joining the host pools or the session hosts to the host pool. I think if we go back here and let's go to the host pool, they may show up. Refresh. Nope, not yet. That's fine. I'm not worried. What I do want to show you is if we hit refresh here, we've now got 2 devices listed in Entra. And you can see there that their MGM is Intune. So if we go head over to Intune and hit refresh, there you go. So these devices are now in Intune. So that's going to carry on for a bit more. Hopefully it won't take too much longer. I just get impatient sometimes. I mean, it has only been about 17, 18 minutes or so. But that doesn't mean we can't crack on with the other stuff just now, because what we needed was the VMs actually available in Entra and Intune for the next step. And the other work that we're going to do doesn't actually touch the session hosts. It just configures the settings for AVD and the app group. So let's head over to my scripts, and I've got the CPAW set up. Probably think of a better name for that, but I'll just leave it as that just now. So this does a few things. The first thing is it checks to see if the modules are installed, and if not, it'll install them. So you've got the graph, the Azure modules, and I think the desktop virtualization modules probably installed as part of the Azure modules, but I just called it up anyway, just to be on the safe side. This will then ask you for the resource group that's in use. So this kind of follows through with the CPAW theme and the name. So if you leave it blank, it'll just use CPAW. If you have called it something else like VPAW or virtual PAW or something, then you call it that. And what it'll do is it'll look for the resource group name, and it stores that as a parameter there. And then it will connect to the graph as well as the Azure services. I want it to create 3 groups. One is user, CPAW, users. So I like to group my names through with an underscore user or underscore device, and then you have the description on what it is. So I've got users and admins. This is for logging on to the session hosts. So I just want users to access it normally, and then admins who have rights to install software, etc., etc. The service principal name, Azure Virtual Desktop. This is for the start VM on Connect. So when you want to actually add the access control to the resource group, in this case, for start VM on Connect, you need it to be the service principal of Azure Virtual Desktop, not a user. So that's that. And then I want to create the 3 groups. So the AVD users group, so just create a new group based on that name, etc., etc. Create the admin group based on that name. And then the third one is the device, and that's a dynamic group. And again, that is using the CPAW resource group name. So providing everything is linked with the same name, it will create a dynamic group based on the computers starting with that name. A bit further down, it'll prompt us for which subscription we want to connect to, and then it'll assign the rights here. So if we head back to the Azure portal, let's just hit refresh. Oh, there you go, there's one, and it's starting to show up, so that's all good. But let's go back to the resource group, go to access control. We'll go to role assignments. So typically in here, you would just go to add role assignment, and then we want the virtual machine user login, and then you'd hit next, select your members and so on. But again, I want to do this as light touch, so we don't want to do it here. But actually, again, you can do that through add role assignment. I think it's power on contributor right. Yeah, so that's what we need to add to the Azure Virtual Desktop service principal. But again, light touch, we don't want to do anything in here. The other side of things that we want to do is if we go to the app group, what you'll see is we've got the application, session desktop, and that's the name you would see. So in your Windows app, you'd see it listed there, session desktop. It's not very friendly. It doesn't really describe much, so we want to change that name. So again, you can change it here, update it, but light touch, we want to do that in the script. So this script does a few things. And the other thing it will do is, just close that, go back to devices. Let's go to the first one. See, we've got no extension attributes set just yet. So these are key for the conditional access policies. So when it comes to setting the conditional access policies for restricting access for these PAWs, you need this set. So again, this is set through this script here. So what it will do is it will, let's have a look. Yep. So it'll look at any devices with the display name that starts with CPAW, and it will add this extension attribute to them basically here. So that's what is done in this script. So whilst the deployment is still running, let's crack on with that and get that set. So there you go. We've now got two machines there, and we can connect to them. If I add my account into here just now, go dm _ andy.kemp andy.kemp.soft.com. Want me to sign in? Oh, I've already signed in. Yeah, it's not seeing anything in my feed because I'm not in any permissions. So that's fine. Let's leave that as it is. And then let's go back to here. So this script you can run from PowerShell, just connect to the modules from your desktop or wherever. I'm actually starting to become a bit of a fan of the Cloud Shell. So let's fire up the Cloud Shell. The one thing the Cloud Shell doesn't do is that if you upload the files previously and then you reconnect, you've got to upload the files again, but that's not a huge problem. So whilst that's connecting, let's check the deployment. Still thinking about it. Yeah, this part does take a long time. It's the joining these session hosts to the host pool takes a fairly long time. So that's connecting. Almost there. Brilliant. So if I run a dir in here, got no files. So if I go to manage files, upload, and I've got my CPAW set up. Just saved it to my desktop because that's where it defaults to. I can go through my folders if I want to, but I want to upload that file. It says successful. So again, there you go. There's my script. And then to run it, it's exactly as you would do normally. There you go. And return. So this will go through and check to see if the modules are installed. By default, Microsoft Graph isn't installed in the Cloud Shell, so it'll go away and install that. And then once it's installed, it'll ask me for the resource group. So I put in the name of the resource group, or just press enter to use the default, and then it will work its magic in there. So again, I said this is light touch, so there's a few steps we need to do. So first one is deploy the core components. Second one is get the registration key for the host pool. The next step is to deploy the actual session hosts, and then to do this part. So that's what 1, 2, 3, 4 steps so far to deploy Azure Virtual Desktop, not just as a PAW, but this could work for AVD deployments in general. I've not put in the storage for FS Logics. If we go down that route, I'll do that as a separate video, I think, because again, that's very much related to AVD in general. And then the same for locking it down. I'm going to do a separate video for locking these session hosts down, and then probably another video for the conditional access part. I'll probably do conditional access first. And from that, again, I want to do light touch, so everything's going to be scripted just to make your life easier. Anyway, back here, you can see now it's saying enter the name of the resource group and session host prefix, or press enter to use the default CPAW. I could probably take that and session host prefix because we're using CPAW for everything. So I'm going to hit enter. So it's saying resource group name is CPAW. It wants me to authenticate to the graph now. So it will do it through the device login. I've started to use this a lot more. I quite like this feature, especially for when I'm running things on server core. It's an absolute godsend. So let's copy the code. Let's go to device login, paste it in, and then it will ask me to sign in, and then continue because I want to use the graph. So I can now close this window down, and there you go. I've authenticated. So it's created a group there. I don't know why it's not showing the other groups it's created, but it's created the 3 groups. I am using subscription 0, which is what is used for where all my resources are. So I'm going to say 0. And now it'll just go away and do what it needs to do. Give that a moment. There you go. So we can close that down now. Let's just see. There you go. My deployment's succeeded. Let's go to deployment. Green ticks. Happy days. So that's all good. We can close that down. So if I hit refresh here, oh, I can't hit refresh. Let's just go back to all devices. Go back to CPAW. Give it a moment or two, possibly. Has updated the device with the right attributes, but we've got 2 machines that can connect, 2 machines there. If I go to resource, back to the resource group, access control, role assignments. See now I've got a few more role assignments. So I've got the Azure Virtual Desktop Service Principal for Desktop Virtualization Power On Contributor. And then I've got those groups I've set as virtual machine user login, and then the admins also have the virtual machine administrator login. The dynamic group I created was purely for the devices. So if you want to target software deployment via Intune, for example, you can use it, and that way it will just target those devices. So there you go, you got the groups here. So CPAW users. So if I add my admin account into this, members, you could, if you've got a standard naming convention for your admin users, you could potentially look at creating this as a dynamic group, or if you want to use an existing group, that's absolutely fine, but you just need to add that manually. So that's my admin account added to the machine, to the group. Let's go back to devices, hit refresh. Yeah, come on, knows it wants to. I love it when these don't play ball. There you go, that one's got it. So you can see now I've got device extension attribute 1 set as Cloud Privileged Access Workstation. Let's go back to all devices. And that one's got it as well. I was just getting impatient. The only other thing I haven't been able to automate yet, and I've been given some suggestions by a friend yesterday, is setting these machines to shut down at 7 PM, for example, every day. So at the moment, I have to do that manually, which is a real pain. Go to home, go to virtual machines. Let's go to the first one, auto shutdown, on. I want it to be that time. Let's do the second one. Time zone. Save. And then I'll just show you here. So if I stop those machines so they're actually shut down, this just gives this time to update as well, because I've obviously added the user into the group. I couldn't see anything there before. Let's just hit refresh just now. Thinking about it. Right, wants me to sign in. So I'm using my passkeys. Depends which account, because I've got several accounts added here. So let's scan the QR code. Still not picked that up yet. It will do. Again, I'm just very impatient at times. So you can see those machines are now stopped. So technically, they're not consuming any compute. You know what? Let's sign out of that account again. And let's add work or school account. ADM. Dev. I need to sort out my conditional access because it should be prompting me for MFA, etc., etc. But the reason I haven't is because I've been playing around with CA policies in my lab recently. Actually, whilst that's doing that, let me just go back here. Again, apologies, I'm all over the place. If we go back to the host pool and the application group, again, what it's done is, if we go to assignments, it's added the assignment to those groups that we talked about, and also it's changed the name here. So again, that light touch process of adding all that in. There you go. So that's me logged in as my admin account on that tenant. I've just called this workspace, CPAW workspace again. We can script that to change that. It's changed that from session desktop to privileged access desktop. I could even add cloud in front of that if I wanted to. I don't want this, don't want it to be full screen. I guess so. Yes, let's do customer sessions. I'm not going to start it in full screen. Save. And then if I log on now, there you go. You see it's starting remote PC. So because the VM is shut down, it's going to try and start it. So whilst that's doing that, if we go back to virtual machines, there you go. You can see one of them is now starting. That's great. That's exactly what I was aiming for. There you go, it's still starting. It takes a few minutes to start. Again, I'm impatient. I want it to start now. But in the interest of saving costs, I think this is probably one of the better ways to do it because you don't need these running 24/7. You can perhaps spin up several of them if you've got many privileged users, and have one that's left on and the other shut down. Again, it's entirely up to you. I would say for any highly privileged accounts, you'd want something like this. But if you've got people running help desk tasks, will this be required? Potentially. Can you do it another way? Possibly. It's a hard one to set a standard for everyone because every business do things differently, and it all comes down to what your security deem as a acceptable risk. So again, let's sign in. I do love passkeys. There's a few things here I've got some quirks with passkeys, especially running AVD or Win365. I'll cover those off potentially in another video, and how you can get around that. Well, there you go. So I've got some Star Wars stuff because I'm a big Star Wars fan, set as my background and lock screen, etc., etc. So this is all set via Intune. You can, of course, set different policies for these privileged workstations. So I would recommend that. And again, that's where that dynamic device group comes into play. And it should load up a desktop. There you go. So if I go to start, you'll notice that there are no additional apps installed. Did try getting rid of the get started, but for some reason it didn't remove it. But all that rubbish that is installed alongside Windows, that's been removed by default. So we've got the core components now for AVD set up, all very light touch. As I mentioned, there's four processes we need to go through to deploy it. So hopefully that's been of benefit to you. Like I said before, if there's anything there that you think I could have done differently, please just let me know. I'd love to know. I'm all about learning new things because this is a journey for me. I'm only new to Bicep and ARM, etc., etc. So I really hope that this has been of use. But yeah, please feel free to drop anything that you think I could do better. Cheers now. Bye-bye.